GRANDAME'S GHOST STORY. I don't know whether you ever tell your children ghost stories or not. Some mothers don't. But our mother, though of German descent, was strong minded on the ghost subject, and early taught all her children to be fearless mentally as well as physically. And, though dearly fond of hearing ghost stories, especially if they were real true ghosts, we were sadly skeptical as to there being anything of the kind that could harm. We were quite learned in ghostly lore, knew all about doppelgangers, will-o'-the-wisp, blue lights, etc., and we could not have a greater treat for good behaviour than for our mother to draw on her store of supernatural tales for our entertainment. The story I am about to relate she told us one stormy night, when gathered round her chair in her cosy sanctum, before a cheerful fire, we ate nuts and apples, and listened while she recited an o'er true tale told her by her grandmother, who herself witnessed the vision. It was a fearful night. The wind sobbed and wailed round the house like lost spirits mourning their doom. The rain beat upon the casements, and the trees, writhing in torture of the fierce blast, groaned and swayed till their tops almost swept the earth. Bright flashes of lightning pierced even the most closed shutters and heavy curtains, and the thunder had a sullen, threatening roar, that made your blood creep. It was a night to make one seek to shut out all sound, draw the curtains close, stir the fire, and nestle deep in the armchair before it, with feet upon the fender, and have something cheerful to think or talk about. But I was all alone, none in the house with me but servants, and the servants' wing was detached from the main part of the building, for I do not care to have menials near me, and I had no loved ones near. It was just such a night that Nancy Black died. What a fearful night for the soul to leave its earthly home and go out into the vast, unknown future! I spoke aloud, as rousing from a train of thought, I drew my heavy mantle closer round me, wheeled my armchair nearer the fire, and cuddled down in it, burying my feet in the foot cushion to warm them, for I felt strangely cold. I was in the library. It was my usual sitting room, for I seldom used the parlours. What was the use? My books were my friends, and I loved best to be with them. My children dead or married and away, the cold, grand parlours always seemed gloomy and sad. The ghosts of the departed pleasures haunted them, and I cared not to enter them. It was a long wide room across the hall from the parlours, running the whole length of the house, and was lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. My husband's father had been a bibliomaniac, and my husband had had a leaning that way also, and the shelves held so many an old rare work that was worth its weight in gold. The fire, though burning brightly, did not illume half the room, of which, sitting in the chimney corner, I commanded a full view, and had been looking at the shadows playing on the furniture and shelves, as the flame shot up, and after flickering a moment would die out, leaving a gloom which would break away into fantastic shadows as the firelight would shoot up again. While watching the gleams of light and darkling shades, unconsciously the wailing of the storm outside attracted my attention. There seemed to be odd noises of tapping on the windows, and sobs and sighs, as though someone was entreating entrance from the fierce tumult. And as I sat there, again I thought of Nancy Black, the old school girl friend who had loved me so dearly, and the night when she went forth to meet the doom appointed her. Resting my head upon my hand, I sat gazing in the fire, thinking over her strange life, and still stranger death, and wondering what could have become of the money and jewels that I knew she had once possessed. While sitting thus, a queer sensation crept over me. It was not fear, but a feeling as though if I looked up I'd see something frightful. A shiver, not like that of cold, ran from my head to my feet, and a sensation as though someone was breathing ice-cold breath upon my forehead, the same feeling you would cause by holding a piece of ice to your cheek. It fluttered over my face and finally settled round my lips, as though the unseen one was caressing me, thrilling me with horror. But I am not fearful, nervous, nor imaginative, and resolutely throwing off the dread that fell upon me, I turned round and looked up. and there, so close by my side that my hand, involuntarily thrown out, passed through her seeming form, stood Nancy Black. It was Nancy Black, and yet not Nancy Black. Her whole body had a semi-transparent appearance, just as your hand looks when you hold it between yourself and a strong light. Her clothing, apparently the same as worn in life, had a wavy, seething, flickering look, like flames have, and yet did not seem to burn. "In the name of God, Nancy Black, what brought you here, and whence came you?" I exclaimed. A hollow whisper followed. "Thank you, my old friend, for speaking to me, and oh, how deeply I thank you for thinking of me to night. I shall have rest." "Rest!" I heard echoed, and a jeering laugh rang through the room that made her quiver at its sound. "I have been near you often, but always failed to find you in a condition when you would be en rapport before to night. What I came for I will tell you; whence I come you need not know. Suffice it to say that were I happy I would not be here on such an errand, nor on such a night. It is only when the elements are in tumult and the winds wail and mourn that we come forth. When you hear these sounds it is souls of the lost you hear mourning their doom. 'Tis then they wander up and down, to and fro, their only release from their fearful home of torture and undying pain. I have come to tell you that you must go over to the old house, and in the back room I always kept locked, have the carpet taken up from toward the fireplace. You will see a plank with a knot hole in it. Remove that, and you will find what caused me to lose my soul. Have prayers said for me, for 'tis well to pray for the dead. The money and jewels give in charity. Bury in holy ground the others you find, and pray for them and me. Ah, Jeanette, you thought your old friend, though strange and odd, pure and innocent. It is a bitter part of my punishment that I must change your thought of me. Farewell, do not fail me, and I shall trouble you no more. But whenever you hear that wind howl and sweep round the house as it does to-night, know that the lost are near. It is their swift flight through space, fleeing before the scourge of memory and conscience that causes that sound. That to-morrow you may not think you are dreaming, here is a token." And she touched the palm of my hand with her finger-tips. "And as you see, my child, to this day there are 3 crimson spots on the palm of my hand that nothing will eradicate. Do not fail me, and pray for us. Jeanette, pray." And with a longing, wistful gaze, and a deep sobbing sigh, Nancy Black faded from my sight. "Am I dreaming?" I exclaimed, as I rose from my chair and rang the bell. When the servant entered, I bade him attend to the fire and light the lamps, and I went through the room to see if any unusual arrangement of furniture could have caused the appearance, but nothing was apparent, and I bade him send my maid to attend me in my chamber, for I could not help feeling unwilling to remain in the library any longer that evening. While making my toilet for the night my maid said, "Have you burned your hand, madam?" Glancing hastily down, I saw 3 dark crimson spots upon the palm of my left hand. They had an odd look, seared as though touched by a red-hot iron, yet the flesh was soft, not burned and not painful. Making some excuse for it, I did not allude to it again, and dismissed her speedily, that I might reflect undisturbed over the singular occurrence. There were marks upon my hand, I could not remove them, and they did not fade. In fact, their deep red made the rest of the palm lose its pinkish hue and look pale from the strong contrast. Could I have been asleep and dreamed it all, and by any means have done this to myself? I thought, but finally concluded that on the morrow I'd go over to Nancy Black's old residence and settle the question, and with that conclusion had to content myself until the morrow came. Nancy Black was an old friend from my girlhood, who had owned a large property in the town, and lived all alone in a spacious stone house directly opposite my home, and who, when dying, had left me the sole legatee of her property. When morning came I took the keys, and with my maid went over to Nancy's house. It had never been disturbed since her death, which was sudden and somewhat singular, and the furniture remained just as she left it when taken to her last resting place. We went into the room Nancy had directed. I bade Sarah take up the carpet, and sure enough, there was a plank with a knot hole in it. So I sent her from the room, and lifted the plank myself. And there, between the two joints, rested a long box, the lid not fastened. Opening it, I was horrified to see two skeletons, those of an infant and of a woman, small in stature and delicate frame. In a moment it flashed before me that I saw all that remained of Nancy Black's younger sister, a girl of 17, who had left home somewhat mysteriously years ago, and had died while absent. At least that was the version Nancy had given of her absence, and no one had dreamed of doubting it, her tale was so naturally told. Left orphan when Lucy was only 2 years and Nancy 18, she had devoted her life to the care of this young girl, and when she found her sister had fallen, she, in her pride of name and position, had destroyed mother and child, that her shame might not be known, and had lived all those dreary years in that house with her fearful secret. Round the box, heaped up on every side, were money and jewels, and a parchment scroll among them had written on it, "Lucy's share of our father's estate." I carried out Nancy's wishes to the letter, for now I firmly believed that she had come to me herself that night. To avoid scandal resting on the dead, I took our clergyman into my confidence, and with his assistance had the remains buried quietly in consecrated ground. The money and jewels were given to the poor, and the old building I turned into a home for destitute females. And morning and night, as I kneel in prayer, I pray forgiveness to rest upon Nancy Black and peace to her troubled soul. The Ghost of the Count. Not far from the Alameda, in the city of Mexico, there is a great old stone building, in which once lived a very wealthy and wicked Spanish count. The house has about 4 floors and 90 rooms, more or less. The entire 4th floor is rented and occupied by a big American firm, and their bookkeeper, an American girl, has given us the following true account of the ghost that for years haunted the building. The 2nd floor is unoccupied, as no one cares to live there for obvious reasons. And the bottom floor is also unoccupied, save for lumber rooms, empty boxes, and crates and barrels. And last of all is the great patio with its tiled floor, where secretly in the night a duel was fought to the death by the wicked count and a famous Austrian prince, who was one of Maximilian's men. The count was killed. No one knows why the duel was fought. Some say it was because of a beautiful Spanish woman. Some say it was because of a treasure that the two jointly conveyed, and which the count refused to divide with his princely socio. And more people, Mexicans, shrug their shoulders if you ask about it, and say, "Quien sabe?" "I saw a ghost here last night, Miss James," announces our cashier with much éclat and evident pride. So great is the shock that I gasp, and my pen drops, splattering ink on my nice fresh cuffs, and, worse luck, on the ledger page I had just totted up. It is ruined, and I will have to erase it, or something. Wretched man! "I wish to goodness it had taken you off," I cry, wrathfully, and I look at the bespattered work. "Now will you just look here and see what you have done? I wish you and your ghosts were in Gehenna," he inquires, sweetly. "I'll fix that. It won't take half a minute. And don't look so stern, else I won't tell you about the Espanto, and you will be sorry if you don't hear about it. It would make such a good story." "Then go ahead with it." Well, last night I was waiting for West. He was to meet me here, after which it was our intention to hit that is, we were going out together. I nod scornfully. And it seems that while I was patiently waiting here, in my usual sweet-tempered way, the blank idiot had his supper and then lay down to rest himself for a while. You know how delicate he is. Another contemptuous nod. Unfortunately he forgot the engagement and slept on. He says he never awoke until 3 o'clock, and so didn't come, thinking I wouldn't be there. Meantime, I also went to sleep and might have snoozed on until 3 likewise, but for the fact that the ghost woke me." "Well, do go on," I urge. "The ghost woke me, as I said," proceeds the simpleton slowly. "It was passing its cold fingers over my face and moaning. Really, it was most extraordinary. At first I didn't know what it was. Then, as I felt the icy fingers stroking my face and heard blood-curdling groans issuing from the darkness, I knew what it was. And I remembered the story of the prince and his little duel down in the patio, and knew it was the ghost of the prince's victim. By the way, you don't know what a funny sensation it is to have a ghost pat your face, Miss James." "Pat nothing," I retort indignantly. "I wonder you are not ashamed to tell me such fibs. Such a taradiddle. And as for the man that the prince killed downstairs, you know as well as I do that he was taken home to Spain and buried there. Why, then, should he come back here, into our offices, and pat your face?" "Ah, that I can't say," with a supercilious drawl. "I can only account for it by thinking that the ghost has good taste, better than that of some people I know. But honestly, I swear I'm telling you the truth. Cross my heart and hope to die if I'm not. And you don't know how brave I was. I never screamed. In fact, never made a sound. Oh, I was brave." "Then what did you do?" sternly. "I ran. Por Dios, how I ran! You remember with what alacrity we got down the stairs during the November earthquake?" "I remember only too distinctly." "Well, last night's run wasn't a run, in comparison. It was a disappearance, a flight, a sprint. I went down the 4 flights of stairs like a streak of blue lightning, and the ghost flew with me. I heard the pattering of its steps and its groans clean down to the patio door, and I assure you I quite thought I had made such an impression that it was actually going home with me. And the thought made me feel so weak that I felt perforce obliged to that is, strengthen myself with a cocktail. After which I felt stronger and went home peacefully. But it was an uncanny experience, wasn't it?" "Was it before or after taking that cocktail?" I asked incredulously. "And did you take one only, or 11? I am hard on the man, but he really deserves it. Ghosts, spirits, perhaps, but not ghosts, whereat his feelings are quite hurted, so much so that he vows he will never tell me anything again. I had better read about Doubting Thomas. He never has seen such an unbelieving woman in all his life, and if I were only a man he would be tempted to pray that I might see the ghost. It would serve me right. Then wrathfully departs, to notice me no more that day. Not believing the least bit in ghosts, I gave the matter no more thought. In fact, when you fell heir to a set of books that haven't been posted for 19 days, and you have to do it all, and get up your trial balance too, or else give up your Christmas holidays, you haven't much time to think about ghosts or anything else, except entries. And though I had been working 14 hours per day, the 24th of December, noon hour, found me with a difference of $13.89. The which I, of course, must locate and straighten out before departing next morning on my week's holiday. Por supuesto, it meant night work. Nothing else would do, and besides, our plans had all been made to leave on the 8 o'clock train next morning. So I would just sit up all night, if need be, and find the wretched balance and be done with it. Behold me settled for work that night at 7 o'clock in my own office, with 3 lamps burning to keep it from looking dismal and lonely, and books and ledgers and journals piled up 2 feet high around me. If hard work would locate that nasty, hateful $13.89, it would surely be found. I had told the portero downstairs on the ground floor to try and keep me awake for a time, but if I didn't soon finish the work I would come down and call him when I was ready to go home. He lived in a little room, all shut off from the rest of the building, so that it was rather difficult to get at him. Besides, he was the very laziest and sleepiest peon possible, and though he was supposed to take care of the building at night, patrolling it so as to keep off the Ladrones, he in reality slept so soundly that the last trumpet, much less Mexican robbers, would not have aroused him. And for this very reason, before settling to my work I was careful to go round and look to locks and bolts myself. Everything was secure, and the doors safely fastened, so that if Ladrones did break through they would have to be in shape to pass through keyholes or possess false keys. With never a thought of spirits or poteros, or anything else, beyond the $13.89, I worked and added and re-added and footed up. And at 11 o'clock, gracias a Dios, I had the $13 all safe, and would have whooped for joy, had I the time. However, I wasn't out of the woods yet, the sum of $89 being often more easy of location than 89 cents. The latter must be found also, before I could have the pleasure of shouting in celebration thereof. At it I went again. After brain cudgelling and more adding and prayerful thought, I at last had under my thumb that abominable 80 cents. Eureka! Only 9 cents out. I could get it all straight and have some sleep, after all. Inspired by which thought I smothered my yawns, and again began to add. I looked at my watch, 10 minutes to 12. Perhaps I could get it fixed before 1. I suppose I had worked at the 9 cents for about 20 minutes. One of the cash entries looked to me to be in error. I compared it with the voucher. Yes, that was just where the trouble lay. 11 cents, 10, 9. Sst! Out went the lights in the twinkling of an eye, as I sat, gaping in my astonishment. Out from the pitchy darkness of the room came the most dreary, horrible, blood-curdling groan imaginable. As I sat paralyzed, not daring to breathe, doubting my senses for a moment, and then thinking indignantly that it was some trick of that wretched cashier, I felt long, thin, icy fingers passing gently over my face. Malgame Dios, what a sensation! At first I was afraid to move. Then I nervously tried to brush the icy, bony things away. As fast as I brushed, with my heart beating like a steam hammer, and gasping with deadly fear, the fingers would come back again. A cold wind was blowing over me. Again came that dreadful groan, and too frightened to move or scream, I tumbled in a heap on the floor, among the books and ledgers. Then I suppose I fainted. When I regained my senses I was still in a heap with the ledgers. It was still dark, and I still felt the cold fingers caressing my face. At which I became thoroughly desperate. No ghost should own me. I had laughed at the poor cashier and hinted darkly at cocktails. Pray, what better was I? I scrambled to my feet, the fingers still stroking my face. I must address them. What language did they understand, English or Spanish, I wondered. Spanish would doubtless be most suitable, if indeed it was the ghost of the murdered Count. "Will you do me the favor, Señor Ghost," I started out bravely, in my best Spanish, but with a very trembling voice, "to inform me what it is you desire? Is there anything I can do for you? Because, if not, I would like very much to be allowed to finish my work, which I cannot do, if you will pardon my abruptness, if I am not alone." Being the ghost of a gentleman and a diplomat, surely he would take the hint and vanish. Ojalá! Perhaps the ghost did not understand my Spanish. At any rate there was no articulate reply. There was another groan. Again the fingers touched me, and then there was such a mournful sigh that I felt sorry for the poor thing. What could be the matter with it? With my pity, all fear was lost for a moment, and I said to the darkness all about me, "What is it that you wish, pobre señor? Can I not aid you? I am not afraid. Let me help you." The fingers moved uncertainly for a moment. Then the ledgers all fell down, with a loud bang. A cold hand caught mine, very gently. I tried not to feel frightened, but it was difficult, and I was led off blindly through the offices. I could not see a thing, not a glimmer of light showed, not a sound was heard except my own footsteps, and the faint sound of the invisible something that was leading me along. There were no more groans, thank goodness, else I should have shrieked and fainted, without a doubt. Only the pattering footsteps and the cold hand that led me on and on. We, the Fingers and I, were somehow in the great hall, then on the second floor, and at last on the stairs, going down flight after flight. I knew that I was being led about by the Fingers on the tiled floor of the patio, and close to the Potero's lodge. Simpleton that he was, sleeping like a log no doubt, while I was being led about in the black darkness by an invisible hand, and no one to save me. I would have yelled, of course, but for one fact: I found it utterly impossible to speak or move my tongue, being a rare and uncomfortable sensation. But where were we going? Back into the unused lumber rooms, joining into the patio? Nothing there, except barrels and slabs and empty boxes. What could the ghost mean? He must be utterly demented, surely. In the middle of the first room we paused. I had an idea of rushing out and screaming for the Potero, but abandoned it when I found that my feet wouldn't go. I heard steps passing to and fro about the floor, and waited, cold and trembling. They approached me. Again my hand was taken, and I was led over near the corner of the room. Obedient to the unseen will, I bent down and groped about the floor, guided by the cold fingers holding mine, until I felt something like a tiny ring, set firmly in the floor. I pulled at it faintly, but it did not move, at which the ghost gave a faint sigh. For a second the cold fingers pressed mine, quite affectionately, then released me, and I heard steps passing slowly into the patio, then dying away. Where was it going, and what on earth did it all mean? But I was so tired and wrought up I tried to find the door, but couldn't. The cashier would have been revenged could he have seen me stupidly fumbling at a barrel thinking it was the door. And at last, too fatigued and sleepy to stand, I dropped down on the cold stone floor and went to sleep. I must have slept for some hours, for when I awoke the light of dawn was coming in at the window, and I sat up and wondered if I had taken leave of my senses during the night. What on earth could I be doing here in the lumber room? Then, like a flash, I remembered, and half unconsciously crept about on the floor, seeking the small ring. There it was. I caught it and jerked at it hard. Hey, presto change! For it seemed to me that the entire floor was giving way. There was a sliding, crashing sound, and I found myself hanging on for dear life to a barrel that, fortunately, retained its equilibrium, and with my feet dangling into space. Down below me was a small, stone-floored room, with big boxes and small ones ranged about the walls. Treasure! Like a flash the thought struck me, and with one leap I was down in the secret room gazing about at the boxes. But alas! Upon investigation, the biggest chests proved empty. The bad, wicked Count! No wonder he couldn't rest in his Spanish grave, but must come back to the scene of his wickedness and deceit to make reparation. But the smaller chests were literally crammed with all sorts of things. Big heavy Spanish coins, in gold and silver dinner services, with the crest of the unfortunate emperor, magnificent pieces of jewelled armor and weapons, beautiful jewelry and loose precious stones. I deliberately selected handfuls of the latter, giving my preference to the diamonds and pearls. I had always had a taste for them, which I had never been before able to gratify, and packed them in a wooden box that I found in the lumber room. The gold and dinner services and armor, etc., I left as they were, being rather cumbersome, and carried off, rejoicing, my big box of diamonds and pearls and other jewelry. Needless to say, we didn't go away for the holidays on the 8 o'clock train. But I did come down to the office and proceed to locate my missing 9 cents. After which I unfolded the tale of the ghost and treasure, only keeping quiet the matter of my private loot, of which I was heartily glad afterwards. For when the government learned of the find, what do you suppose they offered me for going about with the ghost and discovering that secret room and treasure? $10,000. When I refused, stating that I would take merely as my reward one of the gold dinner services, the greedy things objected at first, but I finally had my way. And to this very day they have no idea that I, even I, have all the beautiful jewels. Wouldn't they be furious if they knew it? But they aren't apt to, unless they learn English and read this story, which isn't likely. The Old Mansion. Down on Long Beach, that narrow strip of sand which stretches along the New Jersey coast from Barnegat Inlet to the north to Little Egg Harbor Inlet on the south, the summer sojourner at some one of the numerous resorts, which of late years have sprung up every few miles, may, in wandering over the sand dunes just across the bay from the village of Manahawkin, stumble over some charred timbers or vestiges of crumbling chimneys, showing that once, years back, a human habitation has stood there. If the find rouses the jaded curiosity of the visitor sufficiently to impel him to question the weather-beaten old bayman who sails him on his fishing trips, he will learn that these relics mark the site of one of the first summer hotels erected on the New Jersey coast. That's where the old mansion stood, he will be informed by Captain Nate or Captain Sam, or whatever particular captain it may chance to be, and if by good fortune it chances to be Captain Jim, he will hear a story that will pleasantly pass away the long wait for a sheep's head bite. It was my good luck to have secured Captain Jim for a preceptor in the angler's art during my vacation last summer, and his stories and reminiscences of Long Beach were not the least enjoyable features of the 2 weeks' sojourn. Captain Jim was not garrulous. Few of the baymen are. They are a sturdy, self-reliant, and self-controlled people, full of strong common sense, but still within that firm belief in the supernatural which seems inherent in the dwellers by the sea. The old mansion, said Captain Jim, or the Mansion of Health, for that was its full name, was built way back in 1822, so I've heard my father say. There had been a tavern close by years before that was kept by a man named Kramer, and people used to come from Philadelphia by stage, 60 miles through the pines, to Hawkin, and then cross here by boat. Some would stop at Kramer's and others went down to the beach to Homer's, which was clear down at the end of the inlet. Finally some of the wealthy people concluded that they wanted better accommodations than Kramer gave, so they formed the Great Swamp Long Beach Company, and built the Mansion of Health. I've heard that when it was built it was the biggest hotel on the coast, and was considered a wonder. It was 120 feet long, 3 stories high, and had a porch running all the way around it, with a balcony on top. It was certainly a big thing for those days. I've heard father tell many a time of the stage loads of gay people that used to come rattling into Hawkin, each stage drawn by 4 horses, and sometimes 4 or 5 of them a day in the summer. A good many people, too, used to come in their own carriages, and leave them over on the mainland until they were ready to go home. There were gay times at the old mansion then, and it made good times for the people along the shore, too. How long did the old mansion flourish, Captain? I asked. Well, for 25 or 30 years people came there summer after summer. Then they built a railroad to Cape May, and that, with the ghosts, settled the Mansion of Health. What do you mean by the ghosts? I demanded. Well, you see, said Captain Jim, cutting off a mouthful of navy plug, the story got around that the old house was haunted. Some people said there were queer things seen there, and strange noises were heard that nobody could account for. And pretty soon the place got a bad name, and visitors were so few that it didn't pay to keep it open any more. But how did it get the name of being haunted, Captain Jim? I persisted. Why, it was this way, continued the mariner. Maybe you've heard of the time early in the 50s, when the Powhatan was wrecked on the beach here, and every soul on board was lost. She was an emigrant ship, and there were over 400 people aboard, passengers and crew. She came ashore here during the equinoctial storm in September. There wasn't any life-saving stations in them days, and everyone was drowned. You can see the long graves now over in the Hawken churchyard, where the bodies were buried after they came ashore. They put them in 3 long trenches that were dug from one end of the burying ground to the other. The only people on the beach that night was the man who took care of the old mansion. He lived there with his family, and his son-in-law lived with him. He was the wreck-master for this part of the coast, too. It wasn't till the second day that people from Hawken could get over to the beach, and by that time the bodies all had come ashore, and the wreck-master had them all piled up on the sand. I was a youngster then, and came over with my father, and I tell you, it was the awfullest sight I ever saw. Them long rows of drowned people, all lying there with their white, still faces turned up to the sky. Some were women with their dead babies clasped tight in their arms, and some were husbands and wives, whose bodies came ashore locked together in a death embrace. I'll never forget that sight as long as I live. Well, when the coroner came and took charge, he began to inquire whether any money or valuables had been found, but the wreck-master declared that not a solitary coin had been washed ashore. People thought this was rather singular, as the immigrants were, most of them, well-to-do Germans, and were known to have brought a good deal of money with them, but it was concluded that it had gone down with the ship. Well, the poor immigrants were given pauper burial, and the people had begun to forget their suspicions until 3 or 4 months later there came another storm, and the sea broke clear over the beach, just below the old mansion, and washed away the sand. Next morning early 2 men from Hawken sailed across the bay and landed on the beach. They walked across on the hard bottom where the sea had washed across, and, when about halfway from the bay, one of the men saw something curious close up against the stump of an old cedar tree. He called the other man's attention to it, and they went over to the stump. What they found was a pile of leather money belts that would have filled a wheelbarrow. Every one was cut open and empty. They had been buried in the sound close by the old stump, and the sea had washed away the covering. The men didn't go any further. They carried the belts to their boats and sailed back to Hawken as fast as the wind would take them. Of course, it made a big sensation, and everybody was satisfied that the wreck-master had robbed the bodies, if he hadn't done anything worse, but there was no way to prove it, and so nothing was done. The wreck-master didn't stay around here long after that, though. The people made it too hot for him, and he and his family went away south, where it was said he bought a big plantation and a lot of slaves. Years afterward the story came to Hawken somehow that he was killed in a barroom brawl, and that his son-in-law was drowned by his boat upsettin' while he was out fishin'. I don't furnish any affidavits with that part of the story, though. However, after that nobody lived in the old mansion for long at a time. People would go there, stay a week or 2, and leave. And at last it was given up entirely to beach parties in the daytime and ghosts at night. "But, Captain, you don't really believe the ghost part, do you?" I asked. Captain Jim looked down the bay, expectorated gravely over the side of the boat, and answered slowly, "Well, I don't know as I would have believed in 'em if I hadn't seen the ghost." "What!" I exclaimed, "you saw it? Tell me about it. I've always wanted to see a ghost, or next best thing, a man who has seen one." "It was one August about 1861, said the captain. "I was a young feller then, and with a half dozen more was over on the beach cutting salt hay. We didn't go home at nights, but did our own cooking in the old mansion kitchen, and at night slept on the piles of hay upstairs. We were a reckless lot of scamps, and reckoned that no ghosts could scare us. There was a big full moon that night, and it was as light as day. The muskeeters was pretty bad too, and it was easier to stay awake than go to sleep. Along toward midnight me and two other fellers went out on the old balcony, and began to race around the house. We hollered and yelled, and chased each other for half an hour or so, and then we concluded we'd better go to sleep, so we started for the window of the room where the rest were. This window was near one end on the ocean side, and as I came around the corner, I stopped as if I'd been shot, and my hair raised straight up on the top of my head. Right there in front of that window stood a woman looking out over the sea, and in her arms she held a little child. I saw her as plain as I see you now. It seemed to me like an hour she stood there, but I don't suppose it was a second, then she was gone. When I could move I looked around for the other boys, and they were standing there paralyzed. They had seen the woman too. They didn't say much, and we didn't sleep much that night, and the next night we bunked out on the beach. The rest of the crowd made all manner of fun of us, but we had had all the ghosts we wanted, and I never set foot inside that old house after that." "When did it burn down, Captain?" I asked, as Jim relapsed into silence. "Somewhere about 25 years ago. A beach party had been roasting clams in the old oven, and in some way the fire got to the woodwork. It was as dry as tinder, and I hope the ghosts were all burned up with it.